It's another repot today. Can you guess which one? I'll be back with the orchid we're tackling today. Welcome back to the Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and thanks for joining me in another repot video today. The orchid that we will be doing the repot on is my species Radiata orchid, and you know, it has been needing attention ever since it started the new growths a while back, and even last year it was beginning to send an awful lot of roots outside the pot simply because there was no more space. I have repotted this orchid before, and at the end of this video I'll put a link to that repot. And at one point in time it had a pretty serious bacterial infection, probably from some water that had maybe gotten a little bit too old before I used it. And I was able to sort of rescue it from that situation, and it has been doing fine in this pot for a couple of years. It has bloomed several times, but because it is growing in two directions over the edge of the pot, it needs to be addressed so that the new growths, when they send out their roots, actually can get down in the media. I also know that this particular orchid has some ants in the pot. Probably not a nest, but it does have some ants. So I'm gonna go ahead, I think, and get as much of the bark off as possible outside before I bring it in, and I will be back with a mostly bare rooted and hopefully ant free orchid. Alright, I'll be right back. Okay, so we're back inside with the orchid now. That was a bit of a messy job. I'm going to insert some still photos here. First of all, you can tell that the roots were very much coming out of the side of the pot. And once I pulled this orchid out of the pot, there were ants inside. Not a nest per se, but you know, we just have so many fire ants in Texas. You can kind of spot treat them, but you never can completely eradicate them. So there were some ants inside the pot. I took the hose sprayer and washed off as much of the bark that would cut loose as possible. That washed away some of the ants. I left the orchid to lay there for a bit so that the remainder of the ants would decide to crawl away. And then eventually I sprayed it one more time and brought it in the house to dry for just a little bit before starting this repot. And there is still some bark clinging to the roots here, but once I trim the dead roots away, a lot of that bark will fall away as well. So it's really not worth the time right now trying to pick every last piece off, because I think a good bit of it will fall away as the dead roots are cut off. Okay, so the plan here is to put it back in the same pot that I took it out of. I really don't want to increase the pot size here. I don't think the orchid warrants that. I think it just needs to be a little bit rearranged so that it can grow more as a cluster inside that same pot rather than as a long extended rhizome that goes over the edge of the pot in two directions. Now, the other thing that I paid attention to when I unpotted it is that it looked like I used something pretty similar to my Cattleya orchid mix when I potted it the first time. And I went ahead and I got that for this repot as well, but I added, just to kind of amend it and extend it a little bit, I added some charcoal, I added a little bit of extra leca, and I added a little bit of extra sponge rock / perlite. So it's the Cattleya mix with a little bit added to it. Okay, so that's what we'll be using when we get to the repot. And the other thing, and it might be easier to show you actually once I get the roots trimmed, but this orchid is still one plant, and it's connected right down there, just the tiniest bit at the rhizome. And so after I do the root trim, I'll show you a bit closer without, all of the other tangled roots in the way. But I'll show you how I plan to kind of get this to fit back in the same pot, because I think I'm going to split this rhizome right at that small connection point, and then it'll fit back in the pot in a better way. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and clip it first, because I think it'll make it a little bit easier for me to handle. So I'm going to cut this rhizome right here, and it is okay to do in this case because I'm left with enough of the pseudobulbs to support 2 plants on either side. So this one has 4 back bulbs, a good mature bulb, and then 1 on the way. So that would be 1 plant. And the other plant, even more substantial than that. A lot of back bulbs, a lot of mature growth, and both pieces should do just fine. So let's take this smaller one first. I'm not going to be cutting away any of these back bulbs. That is still providing some moisture, nutrients, energy, etc. for the overall plant. But I do want to get some of the dead roots off of here. And what I do, and if you've watched me do this for other repots, I kind of start at the bottom of the root and I begin to feel upwards, and if at any point it becomes completely soft and mushy, it can be trimmed away because it's dead. Or if all you see are threads with none of the outer root coating around that thread, that root is not functioning either. Okay, so let's kind of have a look at some of these bottom ones. Yeah, the very, very bottom ones here are all soft, so I think it's pretty safe to just go ahead and trim that part off. And as you feel your way up, you may notice that the root once again has some substance, and so you can leave that one. And notice how as I'm trimming the dead roots away, I'm also getting rid of a lot of that bark that was still clinging. And it will save you a little bit of work if you just recognize that you have dead roots to cut away, and there's no reason to fight with getting all of that bark off right away. And again, this is a finer root system, so we probably won't, be able to get every last little dead root off. Picking every little last piece of bark off is also, not time well spent. So we're going to do a thorough, but probably not a 100% perfect job, because it is kind of tedious. Okay, so that's actually looking pretty good. A few little threads here and there. Even a few roots up at the closer to the base of the plant that are no longer alive, so I'll cut those away. My neighbor's dog is barking. It is hot outside today, but considering how horribly intense the heat has been, today was just a smidge more tolerable. Now, not by much, but just a little bit more tolerable. All of the outside orchids today were watered and fertilized, so that was a bit of a big job. And that includes, you know, soaking the vandas and some of the others that are in baskets. So that's always a big job when it's a day that they all have to have some attention. Pretty much everybody is in active growth in some form or fashion, either roots or new vegetative growth. So everybody now, midsummer, gets some fertilizer at least once a week. Okay, that piece is looking pretty good. Now, we will come back to this because there's a couple of other things I want to do before I get it in the pot, but that's looking pretty good. All right, let's tackle this piece. Now, this is the one that had all of the roots outside of the pot. Not, you know, the best situation for uptaking water and fertilizer. The other thing that I will say about this orchid, I've had it now for, gosh, maybe 2 going on 3 years now. So I do have a little bit of experience with how it behaves. It is actually very, very tolerant of the extreme heat that we have here in Southeast Texas during the growing season. So for some of you that follow my channel that also have extreme heat and you would like to grow orchids outside during the growing season, I do, you know, recommend this one as a very hardy, especially for a species orchid. It will take the heat. It does also tolerate the high humidity that I have in my outdoor growing environment during the summer. And it also is pretty tolerant of going dry in between waterings. And I think, in fact, it actually prefers to be more on the dry side than on the wet side. So it gets a really good, in my environment now, and you have to kind of tailor this to where you're growing your orchids, but in my environment it gets a very thorough soaking maybe once a week, and it gets a little bit of mist just every day because it's kind of a byproduct of the orchids, you know, that are around it that are getting misted. So it is not one that is fussy about, you know, being watered. I would put it that way. Now, what has happened here is that the root system under the older part of the rhizome is the part that is dead, and unfortunately the newer root system for the most part was growing out of the pot. And as I would mist, you know, pretty much every day, I would make sure to mist those roots that were outside the pot, because I had a feeling that down inside the pot these roots were maybe not all, you know, functioning for the plant anymore. And sure enough, that's the case, because many of them were dead. And I'm going to try my best to get those roots that were outside the pot in the pot now, and maybe somewhere like up close to the edge of the pot so that they don't feel like they're completely buried. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. All right, so I am going to take a quick little break. I'm going to clean up this mess a bit, and then I'll be back with the next steps. Okay, so off camera, I did go ahead and spray the root system and the rhizome with 3% hydrogen peroxide, just as a safety precaution, because I did cut the rhizome, and this orchid in the past did have a problem with getting a bacterial infection. And I did put just the tiniest bit of cinnamon on the cut. However, it didn't want to stick very well even after I had sprayed it with the hydrogen peroxide. So, you know, that probably was a step that wasn't going to do much. All right, so let's have a look at how we're going to position this now back into the same pot, because this is the pot that it came out of. And let's look at the growth here, because, you know, if you have an orchid that has this growth pattern, you probably, you know, want to consider what's going on with the orchid. So if we look at this, you know, you can tell that the rhizome is kind of long and extended. And this orchid is putting out a new growth right here, but it's also putting out a new growth right here. So this orchid will be growing out with the rhizome in this direction, like this. So I want to make sure that there's enough room on this side of the pot so that I don't have to repot this again next year because it's coming out of the pot. So this particular piece can probably go up against the side of the pot this way so that new growth can continue here. And then this piece has new growth right here, and I'm not really seeing that it's putting out any other new growth. So I want to make sure that this particular part has room to grow. So I will probably be facing this towards the inside of the pot as well. And then once it's in the pot this way, it's more of a clustered looking plant, even though it's in two pieces now, and the direction of new growth can continue towards the center of the pot instead of over the edge. Okay, so let's see what we can do here. I think I want to put a little bit in the bottom. And I think I want to make sure that this root system that was out of the pot is a little bit sort of up against the place where it can get some air from the slats in the pot. Let's see. So I've put it in, and now I'm going to twist it a bit. And I have to put it somewhat at a slant as well, because the older pseudobulbs are lower on the rhizome, and I don't want those completely buried, yet I want the new growth to have some space. And the positioning here is proving to be a little bit challenging. You know, some people kind of like wire their orchids into place, but I find that that can be very troublesome when it comes to trying to repot, because then you have to cut all of that away, and then sometimes it actually damages the orchid. So I would prefer not to do that. Although in this case, it would help hold it in the exact position that I'm looking for. And because this particular piece has growth right here and right here, it's a little bit difficult to have all of that towards the center of the pot, but it's at least not completely at the edge. Okay, now this root system was shorter, so it really didn't need to be down in the pot quite as deep. And the new growth now is more towards the center of the pot, but I think I want to turn it. Yes, yes, no. Let's go back to what we had. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now, as usual, I did not quite get enough media. So let me see if this piece will tolerate me letting go so that I can break away for just a few seconds and get a bit more media to fill up the top of the plant, top of the pot. All right, be right back. So it seems like sometimes I have just ordered media, and when I go to use it, it's like it's running out. So I just got a bit more cattleya bark and then added some charcoal and the other pieces to it. So there's really, I guess, three things I'm trying to accomplish here. The first is to not bury the old pseudobulbs too much. The rhizome is kind of like on an upward incline, and I want the new growth at the proper height without burying the old back bulbs completely. I want the new growth to have room for this year and hopefully at least one more year of growth, because I would prefer not to have to repot again next year. So I guess that's really 2 and 3 together. All right. Now for this one, I'm pressing just the tiniest bit to give it some stability, but not too hard. And then let's kind of give it a bit of a tap here. And that did make it settle some. And I have a feeling that this will be one of those pots where in about a week or so, I will notice that the media has settled even a bit more, and I might top it off with just a little bit extra. Okay, so let's kind of have a look here. We have one new growth right here, and it will have room to grow to the edge of the pot over the course of the next year or two. We have another new growth right here, which has room for this year and hopefully another year. And then we have this other growth right here, which certainly has room for this year and may or may not have room for next year just because of how the pieces had to be positioned in there. But I think overall we did a pretty good job of repotting Orchid radiata. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and don't forget the notifications bell. Thank you all so much for watching, and talk to you next time.